Hey everybody, this is Eric Enge. This is the Digital Marketing Answer Show. And I have my favorite privilege of every month, which is having my co-host Mark Traphagen here with me today. Actually, we are kind of jammed in between this banner behind us and the table, so it felt like getting into a lunar space capsule, but we managed it somehow. And I think he did shower today, so that's a good thing. And as for whether or not David showered today or not, I don't know.
Who knows? It's a hangout.
Because he's in another country.
Yeah.
And that's
that beta hangout thing we've been privately testing with the transfer smells over the hangout. That's not out to the public yet. So.
Yeah, exactly. First Tuesdays. We love our first Tuesdays, and we have David Amerland with us today. So. Thanks, David, as always. It's always a thrill to have you with us and know that we're going to run out of time while we're still middle of like 7 fascinating conversations. But it's a good problem to have. For the audience, this is the Digital Marketing Answers Show. That means you do get to ask questions. And we will pretend to know the answers and talk authoritatively about them. With that, the theme of the show today is actually not semantic search theory, but how do you put it to work for you, and like kind of getting into, really making it happen. So that's what we're going to try to cover today. So with that, especially since I forgot to share the YouTube link in the event comments, David, I'm going to invite you to, tee off the conversation for us.
Okay, all right, guys. And I didn't know about showering because that beta testing, I didn't see that.
We have to,
yeah. All right.
We're going to have to add that to the requirements for all of our guests that they shower in advance of the show.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, it makes sense. But it's knowing about how technology progresses.
Oh, and by the way, I just want to share one quick thing with you. This is a query from Bill Slawski, who wants to know if we're going to do some interpretive dance. So, Bill, the problem with that is that Mark and I are way too close to each other to be doing interpretive dance. So that's definitely not happening over here. So,
well, you could, but it would be misinterpreted, right?
But if David wants to do it, we're good.
Is that the bumblebee one? Because that's I've got to practice that one a little bit. It's a little bit complicated. Okay. But yeah, let's kick it off because time is running, and let's begin because we've been talking about semantic search and its impact for months now, right? It feels like years. It actually is years almost. And we're talking about a lot of theory. We've seen a lot of that come into practice. We've seen results change in search. We've seen the way Google looks at things change. So now it comes down to the crunch, right? Okay, so everything is well and good. So what do I do if I have a website, if I have a business? Where do I begin from? And let's begin with very simple things, okay? Essentially, semantic search is a change in granularity. And I know it sounds theoretical, but let's explain what that is. The web, what we had before was little bits, right? We had a website, we had a web presence somewhere, and we just did bits and pieces in that. They didn't make a lot of sense except within that kind of vertical. And now it doesn't anymore. If we think about how we work offline, we work in an extremely semantically dense way. Everything we do makes sense. Everything we do has a complete reason for being done. Otherwise, it makes absolutely no sense, and it's crazy. In the web, we didn't have that kind of rigorous logic because there were a lot of things which we felt had to be done, and we did them. We created content every day. We posted things on social networks every day. Now, basically, everything which we have to do from now on, and it should have been done, but we didn't really have to, but now we do, has to make absolute sense. Whatever you do, in offline, in a business way, and in online, again in a business way, has to make sense in terms of your activities, in terms of your content, in terms of your conduct, in terms of your tone of voice, in terms of everything which you create, in terms of relationships, and everything which happens in between that. And it doesn't happen just in Google+, but it happens on your website, it happens in Twitter, it has to happen in Facebook, even though Facebook doesn't really impact on search. And it has to happen on pretty much every vertical you do. And why? Well, because, again, in a semantic web, which is what we're in right now, people matter, connections matter, and the social aspect, although it's not a ranking element, actually does matter. The fact that people see you, talk about you, reshare your brand are part of your brand development journey or not, as the case may be, is important, and you have to be able to understand that. And within that now, we're going to go and discuss very practical things which you can do, but this is the picture. You know, whatever else changes, this is not going to change. This is going to be a hard requirement from now on, and this is what you need to keep in mind.
So let me just jump in for a second, because there actually is, I think, a tangible action/conclusion that we can already take out of this, which is, even though, as you said, Facebook, for example, or Twitter don't appear to be direct ranking factors, again, maybe Twitter is used for content discovery, and that's certainly possible, but just in general, in terms of changing the ranking of something that's already ranked, the first layer of being semantically smart is to have a consistent content strategy across all these platforms, right? And so that may not be driving Google specifically, and we're going to get to that, but it certainly drives the way people interact with you online.
Absolutely. And again, it makes perfect sense. I mean, if we think about it in an offline world, you wouldn't dream not doing that. You know, you are who you are always. You don't take time off from your persona because it's you. But on the web, we thought, you know, we could be this here and that there and that somewhere else. And it made sense as long as things were compartmentalized. The fact that they're not right now, the fact that the audience is very fluid, that people who see us on Google Plus and on Twitter can also see us on Facebook and vice versa, is really important. And that does impact definitely in the long term and what happens to us as a business and a brand, but also sometimes in the short term.
You know, one of the things, David, that we've been talking about here, we were just talking this morning in the office here about this, is as we move into this semantic age and the importance of search engines like Google being able to understand who you are in every way. You know, first of all, understand you as an entity, you as a distinct individual, and then your business or your site as distinct things. How those relate to what you relate to, what you're about, what other people think you're about. That this is a huge task of having to do this at scale. You know, we're in the middle of collecting data for a study that we can already see is going to show that even very major publishers didn't do a very good job of implementing a lot of the markup that Google has been in the past depending on to do this kind of identity online. So I think what you're saying is, I'm tying us in, is very important, because all of that, as Google and other search engines get better at being able to machine learn who is who and who is what, about the more clear you are about that, the more consistent you are in your message everywhere online, it will help them to do that. Am I on the right track there?
Absolutely. I'm very glad you brought this up, Mark, because you've been a pioneer in your studying of authorship and its impact and its development since. And you've tied that into a lot of other things like content and search and branding and everything which goes around it. And certainly everything which we see and everything which we know shows that you really have to be what I would call data dense. So everything you do can't just be, oh, I'm going to very quickly draw a very big picture. It's very fluid and not very clear, but it'll do because picture, right? And it's no, it's not, because that kind of picture isn't recognizable, is what you say, Mark. It doesn't have enough data points. And essentially, what we need to do on the web today as a business, as a person, is to create as clear a distinct identity and picture of who we are, what are we doing. And that has to come from everything which we do. It has to come from the content, it has to come from the website and the website design, it has to come from the social media platform's presence and the tone we strike there, the audience we create and find, and the activities we have there. It has to come from any kind of advertising, any kind of media-rich content like videos and podcasts. All those things are part of the puzzle. And the puzzle is that entity. And the moment we fill that out, that's a win, because suddenly you have a distinct brand. Whether you're a person or a business, suddenly you have become you, and nobody else can become you. And that has a lot of impact on everything. It has an impact on your audience and your interactions and your engagement and how you progress from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Why don't we put our friendly curmudgeon's comment up here. He already knows I'm picking on him, but that's because he's trying to start another fight with me like he always does. Just kidding, Ammon. So you can't see the whole comment, but it says, I'm not sure I entirely agree with how that was worded. You would want to Sorry.
Slant.
I don't have my glasses on. So slant, present yourself appropriate to context. So you might post more youth-oriented and trendy stuff on a platform with a younger core user base, more professional-oriented content on LinkedIn, etc., more thoughtful stuff on Google+. And I actually agree with that, but I think that's more of a refinement to what I said, Ammon, rather than a change to it. I mean, I think that if for your purpose of your business, your message is oriented around, I'm going to be lazy here and say great ways to do content marketing, you might have a youth-oriented slant on one platform, you might have a more technical-oriented slant on another, a more in-depth oriented slant on yet another. So I don't think that's really entirely consistent. What I'm really trying to say, though, is that you're not writing about Tupperware on one platform and used cars on another and content marketing on a third. I mean, doesn't mean that person can't have different things they're interested in. But my point is that if your business is content marketing, the time you spend writing about Tupperware over here that's just somewhere else, and that's sort of disconnected from this.
I think Ammon makes a very important point. I think, again, you sort of tied in very nicely, Eric. And essentially what Ammon is saying, and we've always said it, is that essentially you can't do the same thing on every platform. You've got to be platform and audience specific, and that's very true. It does, if you misinterpret this a little bit, or if you read it too loosely, then it's almost like being multifaceted, and you're hip and groovy in one platform, and you're serious and technical on the other. And this definitely, as Eric said, shouldn't be the case. Your voice and your character has to be consistent and should always come through. And if you do your job right in terms of the content you present, then what happens, let's take a youth-orientated, hip and groovy platform, you show, by the way you engage, present your content and interact, that you get it. So it doesn't matter whether you're technical and serious, but you're part of that culture, so you get the culture. And it's that connection which makes everything possible, not the fact that suddenly you present yourself as being hip and groovy when you're not, because that would not really be authentic, and eventually it's going to cause more issues than it solves.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's well, actually, let's take Bill's question or comment first, and then we can dive into some practical stuff. It's worth so Bill Slawski shoots this up here at us. A lot of people refer to brands, and that does the semantic web a disservice since it impacts all kinds of entities and not just brands.
Totally right. And Bill, again, I mean, I'm very glad this comes up because, we're getting to the stage now we can actually hard define a few things. We talk about brands and we talk about entities. And, initially, brands were the original entities in many ways because they were semantically dense or data dense in the work they did. They went into extreme lengths to define who they are. And a brand, by definition, has a specific character and a specific identity. So essentially, it is an entity in our minds. Now, the word entity has, become a little bit more sort of broad in terms of the connectivity that's required now. So even brands can be found deficient sometimes because they're sort of a little bit one-dimensional, and they need to flesh things out a little bit more. And certainly, they need to humanize themselves a little bit more. But Bill is absolutely right that we talk about entities, which sounds like a hugely technical term. But if we think that entities is something which exists, it's a thing, whether it's a desk or a plane or a person, then everything associated with that gives it corroborative existence, if we can assume that. And
yeah,
that's exactly what we're talking about.
So a few examples. I mean, Eiffel Tower is an entity, right?
Yep.
Mark Traphagen is an entity. You didn't know that,
think of the Eiffel Tower. More important.
Eric's calling me names. I need to pay attention.
Come on.
Well, you're an entity too, and so is your mother.
Oh. That is so true, right?
Okay. Some people are easily offended, as we can see here on the show. Sorry. We'll try to get him under control. So yeah, and obviously companies, brands are entities as well. So that's a great point, Bill. Thanks for that.
And Sherrill brings in a question that relates to this here. So does this become, we think of a brand as an entity, and then a brand, and a lot of entities, like a brand, can be made up of other entities that relate to it. So she says, does this become more difficult as a brand when you have more than one person acting as the voice of the brand. If their core values are not totally aligned, will you end up with a fragmented brand persona?
Well, I think Sherrill hit the nail on the head when she mentioned the words core values. And essentially, a brand stands for something which is very specific. And in an ideal world, that outward message is reflected by an inward understanding of what the brand stands for as a company. We know that this is not the reality we're facing, and this is part of the challenge. Companies, brands, entities, essentially, are repositioning themselves gradually across the globe, begin to change internally so that everybody who faces outwards in a company sings from the same hymn sheet, if we sort of say that. So basically they have the same understanding of what the company stands for. And although this sounds like a very top-down kind of dictate, it's not. They're beginning to basically open themselves up internally to a huge dialogue of what they are, what their values are, and how they can best project them. And that begins to humanize the company in its reach to its customer base. The more people who are involved in this, the harder it is, obviously. And this, again, is a challenge, but it is not something which cannot be solved.
So I actually am going to use an example of a company that does this. It's called Stone Temple Consulting.
I've heard of them.
There you go.
Good people.
And we have the easily offended entity over here on my right.
Except when the Stone Temple entity connects to my entity with a paycheck going in between. That's the banking entity, right?
It brings everything together.
A positive semantic relationship. Like that.
There you go. So yeah, so that kind of illustrates the point, right? I mean, Mark has a very free hand to do whatever he does, right?
Cool.
And
I'll write that down.
Steady now.
So, but at the same time, we're very much in line with sort of the goals and the message and what we're trying to do. And a key part to making that work is that we both see it very much the same way. Not identical, of course, but those differences of opinion are actually quite healthy. And it's even perfectly healthy if it's out in the sort of the public, right? I mean, except when the name calling starts, that's when it gets a little more difficult. But we're actually also pushing the matter. We recently pushed our first video with one of our what we call our senior marketing consultants, Brian Weiss, that went live earlier this week or last week. Yeah, and then we are filming another one this week with another one of our people. So we're not only not afraid of it, we're not afraid of it happening. I had to make sure I didn't double negative there. But we're pushing for this, right?
Yeah.
Because we think.
Eric, I was going to say, and isn't it indicative as well that basically, you attracted Mark and you hired him into your company, but he also agreed, right? Because there is that connection of shared perceptions as to the direction you're going. And as you say, it's not completely identical, but it is good enough for a fit to occur. And that's something which in the past never happened. In the past you filled a position with a body, and you could fill the same position with another body. And it didn't really matter what they thought, as long as they did what you want them to, because you paid them to do it. And that is really changing. This is the core values that Sherrill mentioned. This is exactly what you explain now in this example, and it is a true paradigm shift. In the business world, it is very much challenging everything we knew up to now, and it can be very extremely disruptive.
That's so important. I mean, it was really sincerely behind a lot of the motivation for me to say yes when Eric made the offer and said, would you come and join us here? It wasn't just a decision like 10, 15, 20 years ago. I might have said like, okay, that's a better job. It pays a little bit more. There's good benefits, whatever. Okay, I'll take that job.
You paid more?
But
allegedly.
Just a little bit. But those would have been the main considerations, the only considerations. But now a huge consideration for me with the understanding that I have of what we're talking about today was that I'd already had a relationship with Eric going back many, many months, and we had been collaborating on things and talking and sharing and creating, seeing each other's content and having discussions. So we both knew that there was there's a big Venn diagram crossover in what we believe in, what we stand for, the way that we think, the way that we approach marketing, et cetera, so that, not only for Eric's side, but for my side, by aligning myself, by coming into the Stone Temple family and masthead, I am expanding and enhancing in the semantic web my reputation, my presence, my authority, my connections is maybe more important to say, with everything that I stand for, by being associated with Eric, by being associated with you, David, through the relationships that we have and the interactions that we do online. I sincerely believe in that. I think it's a value that many people might overlook.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, this is the disruption, because it happens, to us now, after so long in Google+, it's almost second nature. But the moment we step outside that into a traditional business setting, and you try to explain it, it sounds like we're messing around, right? Not working. And it sounds like this is not what serious business should actually be doing. And incredibly enough, this is actually exactly what serious business should actually be doing. They should be discovering what their audience is, on better relationships with them, how they can basically take a relatively fluid customer base, which is X number of customers, some of which are moving out of it and some more need to move back into it for a company to be viable, and actually make it their customer base with this customer loyalty. And that's something which existed in the very early 20th century, and we lost it very quickly as things scaled up and everything became impersonal. Customers became very mobile in their allegiance, and that needs to change now.
Totally. So we actually have been kind of dancing around it. I want to get into, okay, what do I do now? How do I?
Let's start with absolute basics.
I want to make sure we get on.
And these basics are the same now, because what's happened is because the web has changed and the audience now is pretty much swimming the same sea. Everybody's fishing from the same pond, as it were. So whether you're a blogger working from home in your back room somewhere, or whether you're working for a multinational corporation, the challenge is pretty much the same. The difference of scale, perhaps, and manpower and internal politics to deal with. But, these are always going to be there. So what do you have to do? Let's begin with the absolute basics, where you have to create content. And the moment we say content, you think writing. Yes, great. It doesn't have to be as regular as you had to in the past. You don't have to write every day and be a slave to your blog or a slave to your company website. As long as what you create is of true value. Now, this is the guiding principle. We saw Google's guidelines for human raters, and they look at experience, expertise, authority, and trustworthiness. They look at these three things, and they call it the EAT principle. Well, basically, in order to project that, what you have to do in terms of the content has to resonate with what your audience is looking for. So there's no more, I'm going to create content because it's a popular keyword, I'm going to get everybody in here, and I'm going to convert 0.05% of the people coming in. You really need to attract the people who are actually looking for the answers to the questions they're posing on the web. So your content has to be deeper, it has to be more detailed, it has to be experience-orientated, it has to have a certain degree of expertise, which then gives you a certain degree of authority. So that has to be the kind of content that really resonates. You just can't create content light and think it's good enough. So you start with content. The moment you create content, you think, well, are keywords important or aren't they? Well, I'm tempted to say, no, forget about them, don't worry. But actually, they still are important. And you still need to bear those keywords in mind. But the thing is, they have to occur naturally in your copy, and they have to be, because you're not focused so much on specific keywords. And let's see it, if you're talking about fishing rods, in the past, fishing rods would be in a headline, it would be in at least one of the subheads in H2 or H3. It would occur in every second or third paragraph, and certainly be within one of the links in the body text. Because we needed to reinforce the fact that the page was about fishing rods. It doesn't have to be. It can be just once, perhaps, or twice, as it happens naturally. You talk about fishing line, and you talk about tackle, perhaps. And these are things associated semantically with a fishing rod and what it's used for, which allows search now, Googlebot or any kind of bot from a search engine landing on your page to actually ascertain the exact depth of expertise and subject matter and quality that page is actually there to actually serve. And this is the approach you need to have in mind. So content has to be created along those lines. That's the first thing. Second thing, that content has to be shared. when it's shared, you need to have specific hashtags in mind. Not just hashtags which reflect the content, but also perhaps hashtags which are beginning to be associated with the nature of your brand. If you're a sports company, for instance, well, there's not much fun or any sense in having an automotive hashtag, because it doesn't really do very much for you. So, again, in the past we used to hashtag Jack trends. Something was trending, would put it there. It didn't matter if it was part of what we did or not. Now it actually does, because if we want to get consistent popularity on things which are not associated with us in what we do, we begin to confuse the picture in terms of the branding, not just for search, but also for a human audience, which gets to see that. So you need that. If you have hashtags, you also need to think of ontologies, which is another one of those semantic search terminology words, but all it means is groupings. So if you're creating content, for instance, your hashtags need to fit into the content needs to have specific nature or specific groupings in what it does. So you can't, for instance, talk about fishing rods one day and perhaps waterproof something the next day, and then next day back to fishing rods and something else, and perhaps picking the next lake. Because those things, although they are associated, they're in a bit of a jumble. And perhaps you can have fishing spots where you can put your lake locations, and then you can have fishing gear where you can have all your waterproof stuff and all the things which you need, and perhaps you can have fishing rods and all the associated stuff. And that begins to form groupings in your content, which over time add value to your blog, add value to your writing, add expertise, add authority, add trustworthiness, both from a search and from a human point of view. And primarily what they do is they create a resource of true value. They really make you the go-to place for a specific topic on the web, which is what you want anyway. More?
Well, no, let me fill in a little bit, because I want to actually, when you were talking about fishing rods and fishing line and tackle and things like that, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to take a search engine perspective here for a moment. Imagine I'm the search engine, and I want my users to have the highest possible quality experience. The way I'm going to think about it is, if I show somebody high up in the search results and a user clicks on that page, I want the user who goes to that page to have the maximum possible chance of being satisfied with the results.
Yes.
So now let's think through what that means. So someone types in buy fishing rod or buy fishing pole, right? And so they type one of these two things and they arrive at the web page. It's like, okay, that might be the only thing they want.
Yes.
But there's a chance that there's other things that they want. And even before I get to, well, I've already mentioned it, fishing line, tackle, stuff like that. So they probably want to have a chance to do that, because 17% are going to want fishing line and 11% are going to want tackle. But there's other things you have to deal with too for that page to be seen as a complete experience. Is there a shopping cart? Right? If it was just an affiliate page and you were just going to send somebody to someone else's website, then that would be missing, right? It's not offering a complete answer to that question, right? It's like, okay, I'm just trying to capture people in fishing rod, and I'm going to send them off to somebody else's store, and they're going to buy it. And that's not as good an experience as being able to buy it right there. And then Google has been quite clear. This actually came out in the Raiders Guide, that they want to see that there's a way to contact you, there's information about your company. These are things that certain percentages of the people who come to your page want to see. So if you're going to offer a complete experience, and this is where I think you really get into some of the nuts and bolts of semantic search, this is where you're seeing, I have to address all these topics if I want to have the best chance of resulting in a happy user when they come to my page.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad you brought this up, actually, because we started off by mentioning that everything you do has to be now data dense. And you say, okay, what is that? And I think the practicality that you mentioned just now is absolutely perfect, because suppose you do have a page about fishing rods, and it's just different types of fishing rods. And you're right, the person who'll come there may start off wanting a fishing rod, but then he also has other needs. So looking at that page as a creator, a page creator, a content creator, you need to start thinking like the person who will land there. What else do they need to actually see. So when you link to pages, other pages in your website, and in the past we used to do that simply because we needed to guide, Google search bots there and also the odd human visitor there. So we used to do it reflexively as a sort of poor value experience. But now it has to actually add to that page. So if you create links leading to other pages in your website, which have other things like perhaps waterproof tackle or waterproofs or whatever, that has to add value to the existing page. Otherwise, the link is simply there for link's sake. It actually counts against you rather than not counting at all. If you have perhaps terms which need explaining, and you don't have a dictionary of sorts or sort of a glossary to explain on your website, linking to authoritative sites like Wikipedia, for instance, or you mention a particular location and you link to a Google map setting. All these things create a bigger, better, more data-rich experience, pretty much like you would in person. If I walked into your fishing shop and I said, I want fishing rod, and is there a lake, and you go, yeah, let me pull out this map and show you where it is, right? Because I don't know the area. That's what you would do as a person. On the web, we never really thought about it because we thought, oh, they can find out, they can Google it. Well, no, that is not a good landing page experience anymore. You can Google it. Why should I come back to you? You have only given me half the things I need. So yes, that's the approach which we need now. And it's more unlearning the bad habits we learned in the digital age or the very recent past, and learning to apply the very human experience of connecting. So if somebody comes into your website, it's not just a click, it's not just a person whom your Google Analytics sees a visit. It's actually a real person with real needs who can become a potential long-term customer, provided you convince them that you're worth connecting with. And that's the landing page job now.
So Denver Prophit has a question specifically about that, so I just want to bring it in here. He just wants to clarifications. Are you pretty much talking about cornerstone content and everything else is internally linked back to it? He gives an example of like Joe's Sporting Goods linked to fishing lines and Joe's Sporting Goods with a link from best fishing locations and child pages might interlink by mentioning a fishing line while at a fishing location.
Well, I would say that essentially we're creating landing pages. Every landing page now has to be a cornerstone page. So the content within the page itself, beyond the links, because links are secondary content, and Google now values secondary content quite highly because they see it as adding external value to that page. But the page itself must also have intrinsic value. It's right, how you write it, what you say. It can't just be the sloppy 400 words with a few keywords sprinkled all over it because that's what we had to do. It now really has to resonate. It has to resonate in terms of tone. Are you going to speak technicalese to me, so I can't understand anything, and I came to buy a fishing rod and get extremely technical, I'm going to click away. Make it easy for me to understand it. Tell me what's the important bit. Well, should I get a fishing rod if if I'm not very strong and I don't think I can throw it, or a fishing rod for a lake or a fishing rod for a sea? I have no idea. You should be able to give me these things. So this is the approach which actually gives value, and that's the kind of thinking that we need to have now when we create content, or when we go to a content provider who'll create the content for us. We need to actually be able to understand and communicate with them so that everybody's on the same page.
Yeah, the Raiders Guide, I'm going to refer to it again, actually specifically talks about main content, which is the stuff which is truly unique to just this one page, and secondary content. And that secondary content is actually incredibly important in the overall experience, right? Because if you just view there's a statistical distribution that you can do on the people who come to your page as to what kinds of things they're looking for. And there's some percentage who just want the one thing they search for, and then they're gone. But then, there's many other things that they need in order to, complete their experience. But I actually want to call out two more things, and that is that when Google released in-depth articles, however long ago that was, they made a comment in their post about that, and they said that 10% of a user's daily information needs is for in-depth content. And if you look at the kind of articles that tend to come up in response in the in-depth articles section at the bottom of the search results, although it's not always at the bottom anymore, it does move around a little bit, those tend to be from, well, yes, they tend to be from authoritative sites, but they also tend to be from articles that really do a very comprehensive job of addressing the question. That's only the first part that I want to highlight. There's a second part which plays into this, the step-by-step stuff that we started to see in the knowledge panels in the search results. It's a similar thing. The articles that come up for that, like make French toast, and which I laughed when that was one of the things, because I've been talking about making French toast as an example of a fundamentally broken query for a long time.
Proof that Google watches these shows and reads their...
Yeah, exactly. You're welcome, Google. It just has this thing, and you look at the article, and it's like it's 6 pictures, and it's like a 1,000-word article on how to make French toast, and they really found a way to breathe some life into this thing, and it's fascinating, and you can go through these things, and once again, you see Google placing an emphasis on completeness of experience in these 2 different features, which are really kind of cool special features to get highlighted in.
Absolutely, and again, I think the moment you mention this kind of approach to content creation, and certainly some content has to certainly have a certain specific depth. You touch upon intangibles like passion and love for what you do, because there's absolutely no way you're going to write 1,000 words on something as seemingly light as and irrelevant as French toast and actually make it work. But if you are an expert in your subject, if you're authoritative in what you do, you absolutely love it, and that comes across in the writing, and that's what actually makes it unique. That's when that writing actually works, because you're trying to solve a problem, you're trying to solve a question, you're trying to answer it. How do you make French toast? Well, this is what you do. This is why you should do it. These are the steps. This is why you should take those steps. The moment somebody knows their stuff, it does cross. And this goes back again to entity building, because if we take 6 sites which present us with how to make French toast, and 5 of them simply think, oh, this is a popular query, and we're going to have a little bit of content here in a picture, and the 6th one actually is written by somebody who actually loves this stuff and knows, they'd love to communicate it, we know which one is going to come up. And this is the entity building that Mark mentioned. That this is how you become that entity, because eventually Google will say, okay, that site actually knows their stuff. They're good for a specific type of cooking. They're very good in the instructions. They're very good in the way they communicate. They are very detailed. They create great value in their pages, and then all that becomes a ranking factor for that search query. And the other 5 sites, they think, okay, we tick the box, we have the content, we have 500 words, we explain how to make French toast. Well, yeah, but really you don't. So it has to really resonate.
I think that relates well, basically segue to this question earlier from Tina Willis, which when I first thought, I thought, well, I don't know if that's a good question for this hangout, because it's really more of a content marketing question, but I think it does relate now. This is, what if people do not often want to hear about your topic? I mean, well, interested in SEO. I want to just throw in there, like, no, they aren't, Tina.
Yes, exactly.
Several people uncircle me this past week. They said, like, Mark, I like you, but I just can't stand all the SEO and search marketing content. It's not what I'm interested in. So, I'll check in from time to time, but I just don't want to, see your content all the time. But I understand what you mean. Especially in the Google Plus marketplace, a lot of people are interested in that. But David, I could respond to this, but talk about how you can find ways to make your content relevant to your audience, and it's just that people don't want to hear what your topic. I'll just throw in one thing beforehand, and that is, Tina, it doesn't matter if people in general don't want to hear about your topic, but you need to be thinking about the people who do need to hear about your topic. Go from that, David.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think Mark is right. You need to think like this, Tina, and that's a great question. And Mark is right also, again, that...
Never tired of hearing that.
Oh, we have to ring the Mark is right bell.
Yeah. With all sorts of black arts in the past. But coming back to your question, okay, there's a couple of things there. First of all, you're writing for those people who are more likely to look for something and resonate. And the second thing is you constantly try to broaden it a little bit, because we're talking about the legal profession. Apart from dealing with the law and all the rigors and the rigorous thinking and the logic that goes behind that, there are huge ramifications in terms of social justice, in terms of social systems, in terms of cultures, and how, because the law essentially is a social construct, and how all these pieces fit together. And then when you start talking about that, well, people perk up, because everybody has an opinion, which means everybody's engaged and everybody's willing to talk about it, and that's how you actually broaden the thing, broaden the conversation. Mark frequently talks about SEO, and although sometimes he writes very technical articles for a very technical audience, a lot of the times he doesn't. He writes things about the human impact of that. He talked about authorship, and often talked about, there's your picture and it's gone, and how does that make you feel, right? But it is used that as a hook to actually make us think, and what are the implications behind it. And then when you start thinking about that, you think, yeah, there's a lot of other things to it. And that again shows a sure grasp of your subject. If somebody doesn't know about authorship, and they do a little bit of research on the web and they throw an article together, what are they going to mention? Well, there it is, identity service that Google had, there's your picture you used to leverage Google search to your marketing, and it's gone. Black Monday. Okay, or Tuesday. But those who actually know can tell you. And again, that's how you begin to establish the kind of depth and authority and experience that you bring into your job, and your passion comes through, and your love for it comes through, and that convinces both search and people.
Let me get very practical with that. I know Tina writes in the law, the legal realm, and that's the audience that she relates to. Eric and I were chatting with a group of lawyers on Google Plus back a while ago, and actually I think it was also something that came up at PubCon New Orleans in the panel there about often you see lawyers, law sites posting news items, that stuff that's happening. So if they're an injury lawyer, they're going to be posting news items that are about changes in injury law, so that right. Well, the point we made was that, or Eric made in that panel, was that that's nothing special. I mean, everyone can quote the news. The news is just the news. The news is everywhere, right? How do you differentiate yourself? Say you're and I'm going to get rapidly out of my realm here when it gets to law, but say you're an estate attorney. What is your audience thinking about? What are their hopes and fears and concerns? Well, for me, it's like, okay, I suddenly have a relative pass away and find out I've been named the executor of the estate. I've never done that before. I'm in panic. I'm going to start searching online for content. What are the first things?
How can I get all the money for myself?
And quit my job, right?
You have to know the person.
Yeah.
That's not my real estate. Yeah. But seriously, how content about one of the first things I should do. Help! I've been named an executor. What do I do first? That's kind of helpful content that that sets you aside, that speaks to that audience, and it's not just giving information you can find anywhere, but it's being really, really helpful, connecting to what their needs, fears, and hopes are.
Right, but if you do want to address a news topic, right, then you have to put it into a context where it serves that purpose.
Sure.
Right, so you're not just resharing the news, but and you certainly wouldn't share, just like traffic accident news or something like that, right? Just because there might be some legal implication. It might be, oh, here's a change that happened in the estate laws, and if you are being named the executor of the will, here's how it affects you. Right. So you give it a context that still serves that need. It's really the only way to do it.
What Jay Baer calls that "and therefore"
content. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and the person that I remember it well that at this conference at PubCon that asked me the question. What they were doing is they were just literally just taking news and pushing it, and some of it wasn't even that legally related. I mean, I forget, there was some rock star's haircut kind of thing, which, I mean, look, we should cover this too, because we actually make a big point of something, and I do want to pull this in here, which is, yes, you should show your personality, right? That's, to me, that's semantically rich information, and doing it in the right way in the right place. But I mean, you know, and obviously we try to have some fun here on shows like this, and it's really nice to have David here because then it's easy for the two of us to pick on Mark, which makes it. But you know, so we try to do that, but that's only going to go so far, and we could certainly, you know, talk about how passionate I am about how the Patriots are going to do this year. I'm a New England Patriots fan, you know. That people are going to get bored. You know, that only goes so far. You have to address your topic matter, and then, you know, find the right ways to bring out your personality. And if, you know, if there's some deep passion, like I want to write 4 blog posts a week about football, I'm not going to put American football for our international audience. You know, I'm not going to put it on the Stone Temple Consulting blog. I'm going to go find some other place to put that.
I think, Eric, you brought up something critical, which is not easy to successfully address, and this is the balance between personal and business sharing. And if we go back to Tina, I mean, she does a fantastic job, I think, because one of the reasons I follow what she writes is because she also runs, and she mentions fitness. And, you know, she's in a different country from me. I'm not likely to ever engage as a lawyer, but because I follow her as a person, and we've connected in many different ways, then, you know, I basically also see what she does in terms of the law, and sometimes I reshare it, and that creates a kind of engagement. And it's, again, that very fine human balance. And in the past, online, we didn't really have a lot of feedback in how we worked, so except traffic to our website. And that tended to be a very sort of lossy way of connecting. But now, through social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Google+, we can actually get very granular. We can see what the responses are. We can gauge the effectiveness. And we can constantly find the point which you're raising is that it shouldn't ever be on autopilot. You know, you shouldn't just say, oh, you know, I've shared this here and I've shared that there. You know, 3 posts about my business today, I better throw in a funny. Right, so, you know, it's not going to work like that.
Totally. Makes a lot of sense. So I want to throw out another thought thread and see what you think about it, which is, I've said this on one other show recently, and I'm going to expand upon it a little bit. We're talking about creating, you know, a completeness of content, completeness of experience, and the reason why we're talking about that is because that will send off all the semantic signals. And I mentioned this to you pre-show, David. There's a kind of analysis called co-occurrence analysis, which actually allows you to map what kind of words and things are being addressed on the sites that are, you know, rank in the top 10 spots in Google, say, for a given search query. And you can see how, from this kind of analysis, what they've defined as a complete experience. The thing you can do manually. It's a little bit tedious, of course, and I do know that Searchmetrics has a tool for doing this. Other people may as well, so I'm not, you know, saying anything negative by them by exclusion. I just don't know what, you know, other tools are out there. But the concept is, you know, trying to get a little bit mechanical about this. The only reason why I bring that up is not everybody is born with the gift for understanding the complete experience that people need to be offered. And, you know, you can try to use tools and this kind of technical analysis, this co-occurrence analysis to find it. But then that's where you get back to things like user groups or, you know, using something like usertesting.com, getting people who don't know you to look at your site and tell you what they would be looking for. This is a lot of work to do this well.
It is, and I would also suggest, Eric, use your audience. You know, get them to actually become part of the conversation of your content creation. You know, if you're doing fishing rods, and you know we're in summer, and people fish, ask them. You know, if you're looking for a fishing rod, what is the most difficult thing for you to find? What is the critical? And you'll be surprised. You know, some will say perhaps, you know, we can't find this kind of fishing rod, or we don't even know how to choose one because there's so many out there, and that allows a certain amount of engagement to happen in a very real way. We address things very organically, and it's a very human thing. Take that humanity on the web. Don't be a robot.
Yeah, totally. And just one other thing I'm going to throw on top of that is, to some degree, the search engines have given us, I don't want to call it a blueprint. It's the start of a blueprint, though. It's called schema.org.
Yes.
Google and Yahoo and Microsoft got together, and they agreed on this standard, which a lot of people think of. Okay, this is good for rich snippets, and so when I can get rich snippets, I ought to implement schema, and that's certainly a great reason to do it. And I don't want to overplay this notion of just looking at schema.org, but I think you should use it in the input. Just go to schema.org, see what they define there, and you get some idea as to what they thought, the kind of things you might, want to have on a page about a given topic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say also, if you're using content management systems like WordPress or Joomla, they actually have now in the latest updates either plugins or core components, which allow the automatic creation of schema.org approved content at the content creation level, and you should actually be aware of that. So if you're having Joomla, you should have the very latest one. If you're having a WordPress site, there are, I think, 2 specific plugins which will do that, and you should think about implementing them.
There's some user questions now.
I'm going to, give me one more thing. Sure. I just want to run by David, and then we'll make sure we fit in some user questions. Can you talk about linguistic matching?
Yes. Well, we're talking about applied to within the same language or across languages, because there's also the translation element which comes into this now.
Well, let's do it same language for right now. And what I'm trying to get at is he's using linguistic matching of better understanding, what people are looking for on a page.
Okay, I mean, this has to do specifically with queries which come up, in terms of understanding coming up with better understanding of the possible search queries which will come up for a specific subject in order to create a kind of content. In the past, we used to use a similar approach with keywords. You just take a keyword and run through all its variations and think, what I need are perhaps 3 pages, because I've got 30 keywords here, each covering 10 keywords, and I'm done. Well, now you're basically getting into search queries and language patterns and the way people use language. So you need to be able to address that a little bit. It can usually be done within a very semantically rich page. You don't need to think of in terms of multiple pages, but within specific specific subjects or specific industry verticals, perhaps the expertise required can be a little bit broader. So that becomes a lot harder to address in one page. And having an awareness of that allows you then to create a kind of content which creates a more fully satisfactory end-user experience. Again, if it's a complex subjects, for instance, which have 2 or 3 subtopics, you can think of, I'm going to create a main page, and then I'm going to create perhaps another 2 pages at different time and link them to the main page, and that enriches the experience. And if anybody lands on the subtopic, then I can link it to the other 2 pages, and that actually creates a very satisfactory approach to dealing with this. The analysis which you should be carrying out, I mean, there are Google tools in terms of search queries which allow you to carry this out, but you can also be using tools like Google Webmaster Tools to allow you to sort of find the lexical wealth, if we can call it that, which people are using in terms of coming to your particular website.
Anything involving the word wealth is good to me. So, you want to pull up some questions, Mark?
Sure. Let's go to this one from Joshua Corbelli. I said, I understand the need to maintain consistency across messaging and content themes, but what suggestions do you have for small business owners who own and operate more than one business in varying fields? For example, you blog on social media topic, run an e-commerce store for health products, own an affiliate marketing site, blah, 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 blah. Is there a reasonable way for the same person to write authoritatively about multiple topics?
Whoa, well, isn't that a tricky one? Because, I mean, the easy answer here is yes, because at the end of the day, it's a person, and the person becomes the brand. So, I mean, if you take, the classic example here perhaps would be a writer, and the writer, wrote out one thing one day because, it's an article, and then he brings out a book, which is a specific subject, and then he brings a book which is perhaps, positioned a little bit further on down the industry and doesn't have any link to the other 2. But what you believe in is the quality of the writer, which then makes him the brand which drives the business. So if you have a single person who perhaps is a serial entrepreneur and they they're busy building businesses right across the web in whatever takes their fancy, and they're really passionate about it instead of looking how to make a quick buck, then that person has to become the brand driving the business. And in a classic example across the world, in the business world, we have Virgin with Richard Branson. And the Virgin Empire does very many different things. They started out selling books, and they went to records and music, and now they're into space travel. It's Richard Branson driving everything, right? So he's become the brand, really. The Virgin brand is him, and that's an easy example to actually say.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because people are complex, right? So I talked before. If I wanted to write about American football, I could do that, and I could. I'm very passionate about it, so I could probably start a blog somewhere and probably get into some interesting conversations with people, and that would be perfectly fine. When you're doing that, though, it's going to be so much easier, as in Richard Branson's case, if it comes from something that you're passionate about, because if you're trying to mail it in on 10 different topics, you're going to have a hell of a time.
Yeah. Jim Shankle here asks, regarding the importance of brand engagement on Google+, Twitter, etc., how critical is it to ranking when a brand chooses not to engage adequately to comments versus those that do? Is the difference material? It would seem to be, but has that been quantified and validated?
Well, let's look at what engagement actually does. Now, suppose you're a really successful brand, and everybody knows you, everybody loves you, they'll give you their money regardless. And you put up a post on Twitter, and you get 1,000 retweets, and you put a post on Google+, and it goes much hot and gets reshared 1,000 times. And you choose not to engage. You get a lot of comments, and it doesn't affect your brand. So, in that case, I would say, well, perhaps it would be nice if you engaged, but you don't really have to, because it doesn't impact on your business, and everybody seems to have a clear idea of who you are anyway. But if you're a new brand, or if you're an up-and-coming business or a newly developed business, and you put up a post and you get 10 plus ones and maybe 5 or 6 reshares and 5 or 6 comments, and you choose not to engage, well, next time you share something, you're going to get 5 plus ones and maybe 3 reshares and maybe 4 comments. So lost your proposition there, because people assume that you are sharing content because not just because you want to sell things, but because also it's part of the importance of the online conversation. They're trying to understand what you do and who you are and how you do it and connect with you. And if you refuse to connect in that environment, then you're going to have a smaller and smaller audience, and the smaller and smaller audience is going to compartmentalize your presence on your website. And that is not going to work. You're not going to become an entity. You're going to become a website, an orphan website perhaps, where nobody goes there. So yeah, this is why it's important to share and engage if you are building your business. Already successful, well, it's up to you. I would say, if you don't have to, you don't have to.
Right, but there's, you're right. I mean, some level, there's brands that already made it and they're very big, but I think they suffer for a lack of engagement as well, and I think they're leaving a big opportunity on the table. From a pure SEO perspective, the impact might and is likely indirect, but that doesn't make it immaterial. In fact, the impact, I think, ultimately is huge. If you have a willingness to really actively engage with people, then you create brand ambassadors who go out there and make things happen for you. I mean, Red Bull is an awesome example of somebody who does this extremely well, and they do this by getting, was it Luke Wallenza, am I remembering the name right, to walk on a tightrope across Niagara Falls, or another guy to drop from the edges of outer space to planet Earth, and they associated those seemingly unrelated things with the theme of their brand, right? So that was the connection they made. But then they get an enormous amount of engagement, an enormous number of people talking about them, and created a huge amount of visibility. So.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also the Coca-Cola does the same thing. They basically, rather than constantly creating stories, they amplify the stories created for them by an audience which is already engaged. Now, that's a huge win. This is the transition of the brand from a soulless corporate entity into something which is personable and personal, and people feel they understand what it is. So that engagement in that sense has a huge importance, and that has also, as Eric said, an impact on search.
Totally. So we've managed to do it. We've run through the hour. We're actually just a touch over.
It's flown by.
As always. We should probably, I always like to do closing statements from everybody. So, David, you want to lead us off?
Yeah, it's semantic search in its practicality seems to be hugely complex, and it's not really, but it is very tedious because you have to take care and pay attention to every tiny little thing you have to do. If you can't justify an action on the web, then there is no justification for that action to actually be carried out. And that should be a guiding principle. And if you're justifying, it means you have a clear idea of who you are, what you're intending to do, how you're going to measure that, and who your audience is, and how you're going to engage with them. And if you have that, that's a good path to be on.
Mark, you want to add some thoughts?
Sure. I'm seeing a lot of a theme among the questions today. Not all the questions, but a significant number of them, and even some of the ones that we didn't have time to get to, of people worrying when they hear about this, about diluting themselves. Not diluting like crazy, but dilution.
Diluting, yeah, diluting.
Say that carefully, because we can have a problem diluting ourselves too. But
yes, all the time.
when they hear you talk, David, about the importance of the entities and identification and being the associations that you make and being intentional, and everything you do online has to have a purpose behind it, they get worried that, oh my gosh, every post I make, every tweet, everything, every blog post, everything I do online better be about one subject, or I'm going to get totally shafted by Google. And I don't think we want to leave that impression at all.
Yeah, well, we can address that actually, because I can say that when I was 5, I used to throw stones at windows. I like the sound of grass breaking, right? Now, was I an entity? No, I wasn't. I was just a 5-year-old learning about the world and the impact my stones had on Windows, right? But as we get to 25, I didn't do that anymore, right? Because I knew there were legal repercussions, and also I knew
Okay, go ahead.
how the world worked. So that's what it is, right? So by the time entities, we tend to grow. And so the thing is, it's a time element. You're not judged by one thing, but you're judged by a lot of things, and there has to be a time before you become a fully blown entity, and you need to understand that.
Right, and I think my closing comment was just going to be to just be thinking the bigger picture. You can be human. You can take time to talk about other interests you have. You can do a lot of things. But what we're talking about here really is you do have to have some, and to run a business, you've got to do this. You've got to have some basic concept of, here's what I am about at the core. Here's what I really, for a business purpose, is what I really need people to know. And make sure you're giving that a central place. Make sure there's enough out there around you that you or your brand or whatever entity we're talking about is going to be able to be clearly identified. But don't get so obsessive to think that I can never talk about anything else. I can never do anything else. You can still be human. So that's just my closing comment.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point, Mark. And I mean, as you can see, we've actually made references to other things even in the middle of the show, right? And that, I think, is a really great illustration of that. For me, we those of us who come out of the SEO industry, we want to view these things a certain way. We want to think about them of, okay, what do I have to do to make Google happy? And it's, for me, the real message is, it's time for us all to view this in a much bigger, much more holistic sense, right? I'm not going to worry about whether the signal's direct or indirect or inconsequential. Quite honestly, I'm going to worry about what it is that satisfies the audience that I'm trying to reach, how I get my message out, and what are the kinds of things that we want to be known for, and I'm focusing on that. And I can tell you, I've been doing very non-SEO-like things for at least 5 years now. That have helped with all of that, and in the long run have created the signals that Google actually is measuring. And if you get too focused on trying to understand the exact things they're measuring, it's going to change anyway, right? It's going to change on you. The landscape is constantly moving. So yes, it's really a good idea to be search engine smart. So I don't want to tell you all not to do that. It's a very, very good thing to do, but don't overdo it, right? I mean, really, it's trite, but serve the user first and understand how to market your business first, and then let Google follow and be, search engine smart about it. So that's my closing comment. So, David, thanks as always.
It's been a pleasure, absolute pleasure.
And Mark, thank you as always. And that's it for the Digital Marketing Answers show for today. Thank you, everybody, and have a great week. And now it will take several seconds